Hello and welcome once again to the Slate breakdown for NFL Week 14. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Denny Carter at CD Carter 13. Talking about, of course, your breakdown of all the games. And we were just talking briefly about last night's game. I told you I didn't watch it because I didn't have a Thursday night action. I didn't even care. And I mean, it was like last minute scramble with my season long teams too because I was in work mode and I'm thinking, oh no, it's Thursday. It's 8 o'clock. Yeah. I better make sure I have all my David Johnsons in my lineups just in case. But
right.
Outside of that, I mean, you mentioned Teddy Bridgewater had a good game for him, but 315 yards it was.
Yeah, he hit his ceiling, which is 15 points. So that's good. Carson Palmer, again, proved to be the ultimate cash game quarterback, 23 points, I think, without a sweat, really. So, if you played Thursday cash games and had him as your quarterback, you're good to go for this week so far.
Yeah, that's about what you needed, or maybe even a little bit more than what you had expected against. I mean, it's a tough matchup against Minnesota. So, starting off here on Sunday now, first game, obviously Cam Newton, undefeated Panthers against the Falcons, who 6 weeks ago we would have told you this would be a good game in this week where it would actually matter, but Falcons quickly fading away from any sort of relevance. But Panthers here, right about an 8-point favorite, it looks like. 27-point team total high, as always. And then we get the Josh Norman versus Julio Jones is probably the biggest thing, or one of the bigger things in NFL Twitter this week. Everyone talking about that. So give me your take on this game. Does Atlanta keep it close? Does Julio kind of have a chip on his shoulder with Norman talking trash, or is it an avoid?
See, I would... I think there would be some argument to throw in Julio, to have some exposure to Julio this week if he was getting, the massive volume that we're used to. But especially in the red zone, he's become something of a very frustrating decoy, right? So, with those two elements, Norman being shut down guy, really he seems to really enjoy going against number one guys. And between that and the lack of usage for Julio in recent weeks is very concerning. And, Julio was owned in less than 1% of FanDuel lineups last week. That started last night in the big tournament that they have every week. So, if you're talking about contrarian, Julio, is strangely the most contrarian play possible this week. He's less than 1%. So, I think that if you're trying to get cute in tournaments, maybe it works, but I said in the slate breakdown, I just don't see any need to pay up to play him against Josh Norman.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, it's all it is an elite player, tough matchup, contrarian play. But for me, I mean, I like my money too much to throw too many Julio bullets out there. But you're kind of stuck with him in season long. I mean, I've got him in a couple season long leagues. There's no way you're not playing him. I have seen people on there asking people questions. Do I play Julio? Yeah, of course you still play Julio in your season long league. You have to.
Yeah, no, don't sit him for Harry Douglas. Let's put it that way.
yeah. Do not do that. Outside of that, obviously you mentioned Jonathan Stewart here. Atlanta, their front seven has not been good, and Jonathan Stewart, as far as just volume and consistency, easily been, I'd say, based on those two things alone. So don't get crazy on what I'm about to say. But he's been probably one of the top 5 most consistent backs all year because he gets his 20 touches and he produces at least well enough to never hurt you. Always do just enough.
Yeah, he has very little upside, but he's a little bit like the Carson Palmer of running backs, where Palmer is just simply not going to go for 45. But Stewart, especially against this, pretty soft front seven, and the Falcons gave up 7.6 running back catches per game, which is an enormous number, and no one is even close. So I think that Stewart could really benefit from that. It's not like, I know he's not being targeted a lot, but it lends itself to his involvement in the passing game. I have Stewart in most of the games that kicked off on Thursday.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then real quick, Devontae Freeman. Cash, GPP, what's your take on him?
In DraftKings PPR, it's hard not to say cash because, again, last week he had a terrible rushing game. Terrible. I forget what the numbers were, but they didn't get anything going on the ground, and he still scored over 20 points. That's just such a luxury to have. So that offense runs through him. We've been saying that for 8 or 10 weeks now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm fine with him in cash, honestly.
All right. Next up, Bengals Steelers, and if you remember when you and I talked about this before, I don't think you said a name, but you said someone on Twitter told me, or a friend maybe it was, that this game's going to be 16-13 or 16-10, whatever it was, and was almost dead on of what the
That's right.
score actually ended up being. But I'll say it again this time. You can't be. I mean, I can't possibly be wrong about this one three times unless they play in the playoffs. So there's no way that this game is not high scoring. I mean, we've got Leon Hall. I'm sorry, not Leon Hall. Leon Hall's banged up, but
Yeah,
Adam Jones
right.
cut off his own cast, but said he's not going to play anyway. I just, once again, don't fathom a scenario where this game's not high scoring. We see that Pittsburgh offense looks terrifying.
Yeah.
Tyler Eifert, we saw him asking Santa for some favors. Maybe he asked to be able to play this week. So this one should be a really nice game from BFS standpoint.
Yeah, last time it didn't work out, but I'm not fading this game again. I mean, it at 49.5, a 49.5 point Vegas over under, and the Bengals have 26.25 as their implied point total. That's hard. That's high, and that tells me that the Steelers' offense will probably have to keep their foot on the pedal, which we want, because is there a better offense in the league when they want to score and have to score? There's no better offense, I don't think. So a lot of correlation stacks in this one. One that I really like is if Eifert plays. Steelers give up a lot of production to tight ends, so I would play Eifert and maybe Martavis Bryant as two guys who I think have very favorable matchups and could will both get a lot of opportunity if one goes off. If you know what I'm saying. Antonio Brown. I'm sorry, Antonio Brown. Obviously, a super solid cash game guy, but I just am continually intrigued by Martavis Bryant's ceiling. I just think it's tremendous.
Yeah, absolutely. And then here's an interesting one something else that you mentioned that we've seen a lot of questions going around on Twitter, especially is Big Ben in cash games, and you kind of took a stance here on that personally. So what do you think?
Yeah, I was a big fan of Roethlisberger and Cash last week, and even against the Seahawks a couple weeks ago, because it was obvious that they were going to throw a ton, and that's good for Roethlisberger. But there are like 4 or 5 super cheap cash game guys who are just staring me in the face every time I go to build a lineup, right? So for me to just go up the ladder, all the way up the ladder to Roethlisberger, it just feels like I am not doing this optimally when I put him in cash. I do like him in tournaments a lot because I think that he could blow the roof off here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of with you there. And you mentioned D'Angelo Williams as well. I mean, he's just been rock solid. Even the games kind of like Devontae Freeman, the one game where he didn't produce on the ground, had a good enough game through the air that he reached his tag. And I mean, the Bengals, like we know, has been a good defense, but Pittsburgh running backs over the years have just always had tons of success against the Bengals, regardless of how good their defense is. And as a Bengals fan, it pains me to say that, but I will have quite a bit of D'Angelo Williams as well.
Yeah, I mean, D'Angelo came in so Le'Veon Bell was injured in the second quarter of the last time these teams met. And D'Angelo came in and scored 15 PPR points in basically one half of football. So he's pretty safe.
Yeah, love that. Next up, the GOAT, Brian Hoyer, against the actual GOAT, Tom Brady. 45-point total in this one, of course, Patriots favorite. But they're a rule interpretation of an Odell Beckham touchdown away from having lost 3 straight games. So This is a team that, the Texans took a little step back last week, but they were kind of trending upward quickly. Patriots kind of slowing down, obviously, with all the injuries. So this one could be sneakily close. I can't put my finger on this one. It's a tough one to figure out.
I know. My hope from a DFS standpoint is that the Patriots offense doesn't stall out and they score a lot of points, and the Texans are forced to try to score points, which they don't always have to do. And really, they shouldn't if they're with the personnel that they have. They shouldn't always let their hair down offensively. I can't believe I just used that term, but
Brian Hoyer cannot do that.
No, it probably hasn't been able to in some time. But I talked about Scott Chandler a little bit. I was wrong on him last week. I didn't really factor in the fact that he would be really like the only legit red zone option for New England with Gronk out. I mean, who else are they going to when things get tight down there? I know Amendola caught one close, but really, when you think of red zone, you think of big guys. Scott Chandler is the guy. Last week was a horrible matchup. We talked about that. Eagles have shut down tight ends all year, and he still came out with 16 PPR points. So, I can't argue against people who slot him into cash games if Gronk is indeed out here.
Yeah, and that makes sense because, like you said, there's just the options are so very limited. And if it weren't for Tom Brady in this offense, this would be a team we'd probably be avoiding altogether with all their injuries because Tom Brady just kind of makes it happen with whatever he has left.
Right, and then on the Texans side, I think Hopkins, DeAndre Hopkins, I have in a lot of cash games simply because of the splits he has with Brian Hoyer at quarterback. I mentioned this in the breakdown. 12.3 targets, 97.8 yards, and zero point 0.7 touchdowns per game when Hoyer is under center for Houston. So this is not a game that strikes me as one where the Texans will kind of grind it out. I think that there's a good chance that they're going to have to really push the tempo, push the ball downfield, and when that happens, Hopkins has to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still always kind of stubbornly have myself some Hoyer Hopkins stacks just about every week. But like you said, I think this is definitely a good week to have them because, it'd be hard-pressed to find a scenario this week where the Patriots don't put up points. I know the Texans' defense has been playing much better, but, the Patriots are a smart enough offense. Bill Belichick knows how to make plays to get away from J.J. Watt enough that they're going to be able to score plenty, I think.
Right.
All right, next up we've got the Jaguars and the Colts, and surprisingly, this is still, I guess it's not a direct battle for the playoffs, but the Jags aren't out of it yet. They're within striking distance. You win this game, Texans lose the Patriots, and all of a sudden the Jags have a chance again, which is just disgusting to think about. But the Colts, they were moving well. All of a sudden, Matt Hasselbeck was winning games. He was playing like the old veteran should, not making mistakes, playing enough plays. But, we saw instantly last week, as soon as that game started, Pittsburgh had 2 turnovers, I think, in the first 3 minutes of the game. He threw an interception at the end zone, and, that was just a horrible decision. I don't know if he didn't put his contacts in. I don't know what it was. He was just feeling generous, whatever it was. Matt Hasselbeck did not look right at all last week. So I'm very hesitant on the Colts right now.
Yeah, I talked about Whitehurst possibly starting. Obviously, it looks like Hasselbeck is going to start. I kind of like the Jags defense here. If you really want to go punt play at defense, the Jags are on DraftKings at least are super cheap. I don't think you need to do that, but if you build a lineup and you just have to kind of kick the can with defense, then I like the Jags. On the Jags offensive side of the ball, I think Allen Robinson hasn't seen tremendous volume this year outside of a couple games, including last week. He saw 13 targets. I believe Allen Hurns is supposed to be back. Is that right?
Yeah, I saw that he cleared concussion protocol, and he went from doubtful to questionable to probable. I think he's back to questionable now. It seems like he's on the right track to play,
right?
Even if it's, I guess, somewhat limited.
So that to me takes a little bit of the appeal off of A-Rob. I'm not saying you shouldn't play him, but I think that sort of nuclear performance where he sees 13, 15 targets is pretty much off the table with Hurns in the lineup. Now, saying that, the Colts secondary is bad. Okay, definitely a bottom half. That's being kind. Bottom half secondary. I looked at the game splits for Robinson against bottom half secondaries in his career, and he's averaging 15.5 points. That's half PPR scoring. So I think he's rock solid. I just would temper expectations a little bit this time around.
Yeah, and I want to ask you. I don't know if you've seen him. What his ownership on Thursday games? Have you seen that?
It's high. People are I think what it is, but it's definitely. And this is not like a derogatory term, but like point chasers. When you see someone score 45 points last week, even if he's really good, like Allen Robinson is, it's still qualifies as chasing. You're chasing that 45, and I don't see this as either the game script or the volume for that to happen this time around. But obviously, that's not saying much because 45 points doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could be so at his high ownership. It could be you making a lot of lineups. It's a viable strategy to, maybe fade Allen Robinson, maybe put in a different Jags receiver, or go with an Odell Beckham, who we'll get to and gush over here in a couple minutes, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
Chiefs and Chargers next up. The first time these two teams met, it was really, really ugly, and more often than not now when the Chargers face anyone, any decent team, it's not pretty. Their offensive line is just completely destroyed. They're missing just about every possible weapon they had in the offense, aside from Melvin Gordon, who really hasn't been a weapon. He's just been there. Danny Woodhead early in the season was producing at a high level. Now he's being kind of disappeared at times. So, I mean, for me here, it's Chiefs defense, and I can't get on board with any Chargers players right now.
No, I mentioned that Kansas City has been really tough against tight ends. So even if you think that Antonio Gates is going to see 8 or 9 or 10 looks, it doesn't guarantee anything, any sort of real production against these Chiefs linebackers and safeties. So just be careful with any Chargers you play. I like the Chiefs defense, like you said, a lot, being at home hot lately. The Chargers offensive line is a debacle, and last time they played, the Chiefs harassed Rivers pretty, unlike anybody I think I've seen this whole season. Rivers was shaken from the start in that game, and there's no reason to think that the Chargers offensive line is any better today than it was 3 weeks ago. I really want to have some clarity on the Kansas City backfield, because whoever gets 12 or 15 touches in this one between Charkandrick West and Spencer Ware is going to have a good day, possibly a huge day against a bottom 3 rush defense in San Diego. So I hate, it's a cop out, but I don't see them as either of them as cash game options, because they're just splitting too evenly, and Ware's getting all the red zone action, well, all goal line action anyway.
Yeah, and the really frustrating thing was, I mean, the first time they played, it was probably the chalkiest play of the year, aside from Todd Gurley the first time in DraftKings. I mean, everyone was on West, you, me, everyone else with a pulse, and then it's just even more frustrating to see Spencer Ware get multiple touchdowns late in the game with West hurt. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it would be nice to see that. I also don't think we're going to get it, like you said, but we'll see. Jeremy Maclin, though, is a guy who early in the year was underpriced with his the great production he was having, and then over the past couple weeks, I mean, he's been one of the best receivers in football. And the only concern, really, I guess, in this one is the big spread and the fact that the Chiefs aren't a pass-first offense, and they just might not need to do a whole lot.
Right. That is a concern. But Macklin's price, even though he's had 2 really big back-to-back performances, he's still wide receiver 23 on FanDuel. I mean, that's pretty low. I mean, he's pretty affordable. So I'm not wild about him. I actually don't know if I have him in any lineups right now, but I wouldn't say fade him. If he was in that wide receiver like 15 to 17 range as far as price, I would say I'm fading. But his price makes me a little bit interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we got the Eagles and the Bills, and I guess we're gotta change Ty God to Ty Goat, or Ty something less offensive to everyone, and no dancing to celebrate the touchdowns either, because someone will get mad. But Eagles and the Bills, I don't know what to make of the Eagles team. I don't know that anyone does. Chip Kelly, of course, still believes in this team, but they were just about as bad as you could possibly be for a few consecutive weeks. Then last week, they beat the Patriots, and while it was a very good, balanced performance all around, there wasn't any one way in which they played very, very well. I mean, they weren't tremendous on the ground. They weren't tremendous on defense. They just made exactly the right plays at exactly the right times. Mm-hmm. And then, once it came down to the end, all they wanted was the clock to run out, because it was – you see them up by 3 touchdowns. I'm kind of half watching in the corner. All of a sudden, Patriots getting the ball back down by 7. But
it was almost amazing.
Yeah. I mean, and you wouldn't put it past Tom Brady. You see that, and you're just like, well – sorry, Eagles. He's just going to do it. But, I mean, there's a 47-point total in this one, so a nice high total. And your boy Tyrod Taylor there. I mean, he's
Yeah.
been phenomenal recently.
Yeah, and I was reading some Bills beat writer reports, and it seems like in his during Tyrod's lull, he was injured. I mean, he was banged up. He had a shoulder thing. He had some sort of leg injury that he wasn't disclosing, and it showed. It showed his accuracy dropped, his per drop back efficiency plummeted, and it seems that he is healthy and he's back to doing what he did before, which is just being really efficient, not making turnovers, tacking on 3 or 4 or 5 points on the ground, which is, like we've said many times on this show, very important. So he's priced as wide receiver 14 on FanDuel. I feel like that's a huge opportunity to get a cheap play, relatively cheap play at quarterback. And who has both a solid floor and probably a nice ceiling. And we can't say that very often for Taylor, that because he hasn't hit that ceiling except for maybe a couple times this year. The Eagles are allowing 21.1 schedule adjusted fantasy points to quarterbacks. So I do have a lot of exposure to Ty God this week.
Yeah, and it's also not often that we can say that he's facing a defense that's already given up 5 touchdown passes twice this season. I mean, twice in the past month even. So, yeah, I mean, it was this Eagles defense. Chip Kelly can be as optimistic as he would like. This is not a good secondary at all. Now we get to the most fun thing of the week, which is LaShawn McCoy versus Chip Kelly. And while I'd love to see those two, I don't know, arm wrestle or something, fight to the death, some sort of like old school jousting or something fun like that. But instead, we get LaShawn McCoy on the field against him. And I was watching the interview with LaShawn McCoy. I'm not really sure what he was talking about with Chip Kelly can't hold words I'm not allowed to say. I don't even know what that means. But
I don't know what that means. Yeah.
I kept watching that thinking that I had missed the first half of it, or I was just drunk. No, I just didn't make any sense.
I think it's actually one of those things where it's like if you ever got into like a trash talking like gym class and you just start spouting words.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
That's what it is. It's the argument in the cafeteria. You forget what you're mad about, and then you just be like, "No, you can't do nothing. Nothing."
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? No, not anything. You cannot do anything.
Right. You can't hold my ish. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So, but LaShawn McCoy, aside from the whole narrative revenge thing, whatever it may be, where he says it doesn't exist, but Chip Kelly says that it does. Look, McCoy's been very good. And he's going to be a popular play this week, regardless of how much he hates Chip Kelly and thinks he's a racist. I just really like LaShawn McCoy this week, no matter what.
Yeah, without the narrative street situation, I would still really like McCoy, because if you look at the top running backs, especially on DraftKings, it's just nothing just jumps out at you as like, wow, gotta have it, and then you go a little bit down and you find McCoy at RB6, and he has a great matchup. He just has a great matchup, and part of that is his involvement in the passing game, and we saw that during his heyday in Philadelphia. He was tremendous from a PPR perspective. There were many games I can remember where he would have 30 yards on the ground and 25 PPR points. Yeah. And so we're back to that in a way, in a more conservative offense. But he has 16 targets over his last 3 games, which is not half bad. 4.5 yards per carry. He's getting volume. The hamstring is not an issue, it seems. Look, if you think he has extra motivation this week, it's all the better. So I have him in a lot of cash.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really hard not to. This next one, 41-point total, Browns and the 49ers. One that 2 much maligned quarterbacks. We've got Johnny Manziel getting himself in trouble and lying and just whatever. He was playing well last time he was on the field, actually playing. And I personally don't think Austin Davis was terrible last week. That offensive line just gave him no chance. But either way, Austin Davis is never going to be the quarterback of the future for this team, and we need to see if Manziel is. And then on the other side, we get, Jaguars castaway from a few years ago, Blaine Gabbert, who's all of a sudden kind of one of those guys, you close your eyes and you look at the fantasy points later and you realize he played pretty well, but still not a guy that makes you comfortable to watch playing.
No, definitely don't watch this game. If you have Gabbert in cash or whatever,
Yeah.
don't watch. And really, both of these quarterbacks, I talked about this in the article. Just because they're mostly bad quarterbacks and cheap doesn't mean that they're only a GPP play. In fact, their floor is much more appealing than their ceiling, which I don't think that either of them have a great ceiling. Um, Manziel is the minimum on DraftKings, and I know you're no fan of the Boy King, but I do. I think that if you built a lineup that you just can't fit anybody else in at quarterback, I'm going with Manziel because I just that running game is non-existent. He's going to be dropping back a lot. And in his last start, despite I know there was some whacked out game script with against Pittsburgh that resulted in him throwing a ton, getting a ton of possessions. I understand all that, but he would really it would have to be a debacle of a game for him not to meet cost. And the Niners have been very, very bad on the road as far as that secondary goes. I know Cutler pooped his pants last week, but beyond that, I mean, really, they have truly been bad on the road. So I don't mind Manziel if you've just like gone huge at running back and wide receiver pretty much this week.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think he's ever going to be a legend. He's never going to be a great quarterback, but I will give credit where credit's due. I mean, he was efficient in the last game we started. I mean, the game against the Bengals, he looked fine in that game too. It was just you didn't take chances down the field, mostly because there weren't chances to be had down the field. But you put him in a position to not make mistakes, and he really didn't make mistakes. So, like you said, I mean, as far as a minimum price guy, I think he's fine. He's the guy that I would still be hesitant to slot in. But like you said, I mean, someone's going to score points, and it's not going to be the running backs.
No, it's not. It's just simply not. We know that. Just there's a mountain of evidence. Just real quick on the Niners side, I think both Anquan Bolden and Sean Drone are cash type players. Bolden's $4,000 on DraftKings, just super cheap. He will be covered mostly by safety Kwan Williams, who is like I mentioned in the article, almost 40 pounds lighter than Bolden. And we saw Larry Fitzgerald, who had a similar size advantage over Kwan Williams, have a really nice day against Cleveland. So I like Bolden and Drone. I said this in an article. If he's upright and conscious for this whole game, I don't understand how he can score less than 15 PPR points the way he's being used. And Cleveland's terrible against the run.
Yeah. I mean, he's been a guy who just continues to be really cheap. And like you said with Bolden, I mean, he had a couple of decent games when he wasn't completely healthy. I mean, you see him on the sideline in sweatpants and in between plays, and he's a guy he's still a viable option. It's just whether or not they get him the ball. And I mean, at his price, though, he's a guy that I certainly have some cheap exposure to as well.
Sure.
All right, moving on here to the next game. Chicago and Washington here in this one. And this one, I'm just not too excited about. I saw some hype tweets about Matt Jones here. People loving Matt Jones, and I do not ever play Washington running backs. And that's not to say those people are wrong. They may very well be right, and he may very well have a great game. But I personally it's one of those things for me. I cannot play a Washington running back.
No, I mean, Matt Jones has only gone over 35% of Washington offensive snaps like twice this year. So no, I don't understand that appeal. In the other backfield here in the Chicago backfield, I was very surprised to see Matt Forte got 26 touches against San Francisco last week. I guess that backfield is back to being his, and that's fine. The weather is supposed to be really dicey in Chicago. Lots of wind and possibly rain. Wind is what we're concerned about when we talk about the passing game. So if you pay attention to the weather and see it's really windy, I would expect the Bears to keep it on the ground, and that means that Forte could be in for another 20 to 25 touches, through the air and on the ground. Washington's front seven against teams that actually have legit running attacks, they've been really bad. Like teams have scored a lot of points, a lot of rushing yards against Washington when the game actually calls for that sort of attack. So Forte, I think, is a very sneaky play this week. A sneaky like top two, top three kind of upside guy.
Yeah, and I mean it's strange how these things change so quickly because obviously when Forte was healthy, everyone was, why isn't Matt Forte producing? And he wasn't getting quite the volume that he was. And then Jeremy Langford comes in. It was all that long screen pass that he caught. When you catch that long screen pass, and everyone's like, wow, Jeremy Langford. And then they come in, they're kind of splitting some time. But like you said, Forte getting the bulk of the work last week. He's still the better player. I mean, it's clear that he's the guy still that should be getting all the touches. And I mean, he was getting goal line rushes, and people always I can't remember the stat, but people always talk about how Matt Forte doesn't get goal line work and blah blah blah, and that's just not true.
No,
There's just not a lot of goal line work to go around necessarily.
Right.
So, outside of that, I don't have a lot of pieces of this game. You mentioned here briefly Zach Miller. Obviously, Martellus Bennett on the IR now. I mean, he's really cheap, especially on DraftKings. That's about it, really.
I'm just not really excited too much. The Washington is actually really good against tight ends. A lot of Miller's production this year have come on really fluky long touchdowns. So I don't have Miller this week. Maybe that'll hurt me, but I'm not. We'll talk about the cheap tight end that I'm interested in a little later.
Yeah, that same game where Langford caught the long screen pass, it was essentially the same thing to Miller. Jets and Titans next up, 43-point total here. And like you mentioned here, Vegas loves the Jets. They do not love the Titans here. And, Chris Ivory has been one of those guys that are early in the year. We said, look at the volume, go play Ivory, great cash game play. Then it kind of went downhill a little bit. But then Ryan Fitzpatrick, I mean, he's been, when you could factor in price, one of the better, when he's healthy at least, one of the better quarterbacks dollar per dollar in the league really this year. Sure. And Decker and Marshall seems like the perfect duo for this offense.
Yeah, I talked about Ryan Fitzpatrick's splits this season in wins and losses, and basically he is like borderline elite when they win, and then not so much when they lose. So with the Jets being such big heavy favorites here, the Vegas line is telling us that the Jets will probably win. And so if you're looking for a clue as to whether Fitzpatrick can continue this hot streak he's on, I think that's it. I think that's it. And Brandon Marshall also has really, really nice splits when the Jets win, seeing a lot of volume in those games, a lot of receptions, and of course touchdowns. I broke that down in the article this week. So I'm fine with both of them. I actually have the Thursday games that I entered, I have Marshall in almost everyone. I think that he has potential to dominate this game.
Yeah, he's been as consistent as they come, and he's still in a borderline elite receiver that's still not priced like one. So I certainly have myself some shares as well. The Rams and the Lions next up. Obviously the Rams, 20.75 points in this one. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. The Lions defense has been playing very well, aside from the fact that they don't know how to defend a Hail Mary. But they, twice now against the Packers, really, I don't want to say stopped Aaron Rodgers in the offense, but slowed them down significantly, played well, admirably. And, I know that's not a passing attack that's statistically as good as it has been in the past, but they played well against good opponents recently, dominated a couple games as well. I just don't see. I'm not playing Rams anyway. There's no way that's happening. But it's just a matter of, do I play a lot of the Lions defense with the other defenses I like? Because this Rams defense, and if you're a betting person, I don't see any way you don't take the Lions in this one.
Yeah, the Rams 20.75. They're gonna score 3 touchdowns here. That's what the line said.
They're waiting for Tavon Austin kick returns.
I guess that's the only way. But yeah, Detroit defense is a great play. Pretty reasonable on DraftKings, I have to say, price wise. I don't love away defenses, defenses on the road, but there are exceptions. And I think when Nick Foles will probably have to throw Detroit's run defense has been really stellar. So Todd Gurley is a non-starter in cash. I don't understand how you can put him in your cash lineup. And honestly, why would you put him in your GPP lineup? It's sad but true at this point. I talked just real quick about Calvin Johnson's size advantage here. He's actually done really well in games in which he's had a big size advantage. Obviously, that happens more often than not with him because he's such an enormous man. But he is 7 inches taller than Janoris Jenkins, who will cover him. I think that's very tempting for me to get a lot of Calvin and GPPs because that's the sort of advantage that he's taken advantage, that he's really exploited over his career, and he's rejuvenated in this new attack, and thank goodness for that because he provides a lot of value at his cost.
Yeah, and if there's one thing that the Lions do well, it's making sure that Calvin Johnson can take advantage of mismatches, as we saw in the Thanksgiving game. I mean, you throw it near him, he's going to go get it in 7 inches. I mean, that's a big brother, little brother situation.
I know.
Fighting in the backyard, and you say, look, you're going to have to play dirty to win this battle. So good luck with that.
Yeah.
Buccaneers and the Saints next up. Huge total, 51 points. We saw the Saints offense 2 weeks ago, awful. Last week, back at home, they played much better. So now we've got here Jameis Winston, who I'll be the first one to admit I was not high on moving into this season. And it looks like I was wrong on him. I mean, he's looked good. Not great, still inefficient at times. But, I mean, he's got upside, and it's hard not to like Doug Martin. Now, randomly, all of a sudden, Mark Ingram is not only hurt, but out for the season. So that Saints backfield has been a hot topic as well. And
yeah.
I want a piece of it, but I don't feel good about getting any pieces of it.
Nah, me neither. Honestly, I guess Hightower is supposed to be the early down back, which I don't know. I just in this game it doesn't really hold a lot of appeal for me. I do want to point out one stat that I mentioned in the article. So the Saints defense, when you adjust for strength of schedule, allows 130 PPR points per game to opposing teams. That is, I mean, I've tracked adjusted fantasy points for like 3 years now. I've never seen anything close to that. And so the stacking options are tremendous here. Winston with Mike Evans, Winston even with Vincent Jackson, who has a great matchup, and then Doug Martin, who I can't get away from Doug Martin this week. As bad as the Saints are against the pass, they've also been enormously bad against the run. And you have a team. Tampa Bay is, I think, in the top 5 as far as percentage of run plays that they run. So we're talking about a good running back who could see 25 carries, and I really really like his floor. It's not saying much. He'll be widely owned, but I'm into him.
Yeah, he absolutely should be. And then as you mentioned on the Saints side, 23.5 points. It is Drew Brees outside of the Superdome. Lots of injury concerns, of course. So I'm not saying it's complete fade. It's a 51 points over under here, but I don't have much Drew Brees.
Yeah, so we should say that Brandon Cooks is supposed to miss this game after suffering a concussion in practice. I think that will mess with the Vegas line. If it hasn't already, I didn't check before the show. But it makes this game a little less appealing as far as like correlating stacks and thinking that it's going to be one of these typical Saints games that's 31-27 or something in that range. So I'm not all in on just piling up players in this game, but Brandon Coleman with Cooks out, I think becomes a great just GPP throw in for almost the minimum. Coleman has done well when he's had opportunity, as we saw last week. Yeah. I don't understand why he's not more featured in that offense. But anyway, just look at Coleman when you're building your GPPs this week.
Yeah, I mean, as far as season long goes, Coleman was a guy that I drafted a ton of and has since dropped a ton of. But certainly this week is the one where you want to get yourself some exposure. Broncos and Raiders next up. Broncos kind of going through the motions right now, it seems, with these inferior teams. It's score a couple touchdowns, sit back, kill clock, wait until – I don't know if they're actually waiting for Peyton Manning to be healthy again or if they're just waiting for the playoffs. But, I mean, this isn't a team that's going out of their way to score a ton of points. I mean, they're not taking a lot of shots down the field, which is frustrating because they have so many weapons down the field. But when they just don't need to, because the defense is just so damn good – I mean, you score 17, 20 points in a game with this defense, and you're in good shape.
Yeah, it's over. And so that I know it sounds funny, but the Broncos' goal obviously is to score as few points as possible to win the game.
Yep.
And that makes sense with that defense. We have to keep that in mind, though, for DFS purposes. One Demaryius Thomas, his price has dropped dramatically on DraftKings, and for good reason. I mean, he's a product of this new, very conservative offense. But he has this great matchup this week against the Raiders, who were bad against the pass, but also specifically DJ Hayden, who has been really just torched for most of the season, especially the last 6 weeks or so. Demaryius has 24 targets in 3 games with Osweiler at the controls. That's not a tremendous number, but it's enough for me to be. I don't know. I have some cash game interest in Demaryius, which I don't think we'll be able to say very much going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully they get him involved in the short passing game more so like he used to be with Peyton Manning. I mean, it was wide receiver screens, short slants, all this stuff. And I mean, he does most of his work after the catch anyway. So, I mean, you don't need to throw it 50 yards for Demaryius to pay off. Packers and Cowboys, this one, beginning of the season, would have looked like a really prime Sunday afternoon game for Week 14. And now... it's disgusting. Eddie Lacy is a guy who has been up, but he's been down. He's been terrible. He's been good. The Cowboys, everyone's hurt outside of Des Bryant, and he's not doing anything. It's just I'm not a fan of either of these teams. I don't think either team is great. I mean, Aaron Rodgers kind of, like you said here, saved his fantasy bacon with that crazy. The final minute and a half. I mean, 2 touchdowns, one of them rushing.
Yeah. So, I think he had like 13 fantasy points coming into that final 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, leave it to Aaron Rodgers to bail himself out in 90 seconds. But either way, I mean, this one, it's just not tremendously appealing. The Cowboys, outside of Darren McFadden, really haven't had anybody that's even been kind of consistent. Yeah,
the Cowboys' offense is a big fat fade for me, but Green Bay's defense. I've talked about Detroit's defense, a couple other defenses. I can't argue with anybody who just says I'm going with Green Bay's defense in every cash game and every GPP, and I'm forgetting about it because their price is pretty reasonable on DraftKings, not as reasonable on FanDuel, but okay there, and so a big correlation is quarterback pressures to turnovers, and Green Bay has 77 quarterback hits through 12 games, which is the 6th most in the NFL. Castle crumbles under pressure. I don't think that they'll be able to hide Castle like they did last week. They really hit him very well against Washington, and Washington still scored 9 fantasy points. So, I love the Packers defense.
Yeah, and it's hard not to. And as far as their offense, I mean, I just think there's better options at similar prices just about everywhere that I have very, very little Packers exposure.
Yeah, I saw a stat on Pro Football Focus today that said the Cowboys have allowed 1 touchdown to outside receivers all year. So your James Jones and the other outside receiver for
Devontae Adams.
Devontae Adams was your hopes there are not looking great, and I don't really see reason to pay up for Randall Cobb at this point either. No. But if you have to play a Green Bay receiver, then I'm going Cobb, obviously.
Yeah, certainly. Next up, Seahawks and Ravens. Ravens, obviously another one of those Cowboy-type teams that's just everybody's hurt, everybody's terrible. Buck Allen 2 weeks ago let us all down, and then whoever had a short memory about it and rostered him last week got, really both sides of this one. You got Thomas Rawls and Buck Allen, both guys with monster PPR upside in Seattle's offense has been effective. I mean, Russell Wilson, ever since they called him a celebrity quarterback, he's just a quarterback, and he's looked so good. So you just hope that the Ravens can keep this one close for production.
Yes. I'm hesitant to really get super involved in this game DFS-wise because I just think that the game script could be so crazy with Schaub's pick 6 itis and the Seahawks being a pretty good defense. But look at Mark Trestman's offense has a lot of dump offs, a lot of screens, a lot of running back receptions, no matter who it is. When they're good, it's even better. Buck Allen is good at catching the football and does a lot with it with the opportunity. So this is a bad matchup on paper, but I think that he could save his day through through the air. So I'm not fading him in this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a good spot there. All right, moving on here to the final game. We've got Dolphins and the Giants Monday night. 46.5 point total. Not a bad one there. We know the roller coaster team, the Miami Dolphins, monster upside, huge downside. I mean, they've had great games. They've had terrible games. The Giants have been awful against the pass. So is this a Ryan Tannehill game for you?
No, I mean maybe it is, but not. I can't with Tannehill right now. If I'm going to have any part of the Dolphins offense, it's either going to be Jarvis Landry or Lamar Miller, who saw miraculously 20 carries for the first time in his career last week, and he didn't vanish into thin air. So maybe, just maybe, we have a commitment to Lamar Miller touching the football. And in a game, look at the Giants. I mentioned this, went through the stats on this in the article. Giants are really bad against the run, like truly, truly awful. So Miller is, I think, a sneaky play in a dumpster fire offense, which scares me a little bit. But I do like Miller in this one.
All right, I definitely like that. Okay, so Odell Beckham, as far as top receiver on the slate, whatever it may be, how much exposure to Odell Beckham are you going to have?
A ton, just a ton. The Dolphins are 25th in fantasy production allowed to wideouts. He's taking on Brent Grimes, who doesn't scare anybody anymore. Remember when he did? I mean,
vaguely, like but yeah, that was a time.
Yeah, but no, OBJ I think is super safe. I think he's going to bail a lot of people out on Monday night. Yeah.
Yeah, he's about as good as it gets. So, all right, that'll wrap things up for us for Week 14. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. He is at CDCarter13. And make sure you check out the rest of Denny's article and all the rest of the content at dailyfantasycafe.com.